Well, folks, despite the media's best attempts to turn Kamala Harris into a massive frontrunner, it is not working. We'll bring you the latest on that momentarily. First, remember, Matt Walsh's Am I Racist is the biggest political documentary in 20 years. It's a top 10 box office hit with a 98% audience score, and it's only in theaters. But all of that started with What is a Woman, the groundbreaking documentary phenomenon, the first movie from Matt. Stream What is a Woman right now on Daily Wire Plus. If you're not a Daily Wire Plus member, you should join at dailywire.com/subscribe. Use code DW30 for 30% off. Okay, so despite the media's best attempts to push Kamala Harris to a broad lead in the presidential race, she cannot do it. It's not happening. A brand new CNN poll shows 48 Harris, 47 Trump. Okay, that is a terrible poll for Kamala Harris. It is within the margin of error. A 48-47 lead in these polls means like 20 people. So what does that mean? It means, effectively speaking, again, this race is a dead heat. Not only that, the poll numbers in this CNN poll are really dangerous for Kamala Harris. It finds right now that Harris and Trump are running about even with independent voters. Independent women are breaking heavily for Kamala Harris. Independent men are splitting only 47-40 for Trump. Again, I don't think that stat is right. I think that independent men are going to break broader for Trump than that. But it's not just that. She is not running strong among some of her core constituencies, for example. If you take a look among black voters, when it comes to black voters, she is only winning 79-16. If Donald Trump wins 16% of the black vote, she's cooked. She's done. According to this poll, 59% of Latinos voting for Harris, 40% for Trump. Again, if those numbers stick, she loses the election. She's winning among voters younger than 30, 55-38, but these are not good numbers for Kamala Harris. And it appears that the Trump campaign has basically settled into stasis. I believe that the Trump campaign basically believes at this point that everything is baked into the cake. Nothing is going to change from now until the election, unless it's a sort of exogenous circumstance, a world event that harms her campaign. So better just sit back on your laurels and ride it out. Now, I actually don't think it's a bad strategy. I think that Trump at this point, his entire goal has to be just pouring money into ads that attack Kamala Harris's record and point out that she is just Joe Biden with a fresh coat of paint. And that's all that Kamala Harris's candidacy is. They literally swapped out one face for another face on the same exact machine. That is Vivek Ramaswamy's point. He is correct. Okay, so if Trump does that, then she's got a real problem, which is why she's been running ads in the swing states trying to define herself. She realizes that she's not vulnerable in attacking Donald Trump. She can attack Trump all day long. But here's the thing. That's already been heard. We already get it. Everybody in the world has an opinion about Donald Trump, and no one's changing that opinion about Donald Trump. The problem is she herself is not well established in the public mind, and the more Americans find out about it, the worse it is. So she's got to catch 22. The more she goes out and talks, the less people like her. That is one prong. The other is, if she doesn't talk, then it's going to be up to the Trump campaign to define her. And all you have to go on is her record as vice president of the United States and all the things that she said in 2018, 2019, 2020. She's trying to split that baby, presumably by doing only friendly interviews with very friendly sources. So it was announced today that tonight she will do a sit-down interview with Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC. Now, why is she doing that? She's doing that because she realizes she has to reintroduce herself to the public, but she's picking the worst available opportunity to do that. The MSNBC crowd is already going to vote for Kamala Harris. Ain't an MSNBC voter who is voting for Donald Trump. Ain't going to happen. Plus, Stephanie Ruhle is not going to ask her a single difficult question. How do we know? Well, because she said so. She was on Real Time on Friday, and she basically said there is no reason to even ask Kamala Harris questions. She has no obligation to give answers. And the Harris campaign saw, they said, we'd love her to interview us. I love that. Stephanie Ruhle saying right now, she doesn't need to answer questions. And Kamala Harris's response is, I would love for you to be the one who asks me. I wonder why. Here's Stephanie Ruhle just a couple nights ago.
I just said I'm not going to vote for her. She's not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
Okay, and that is the person that they're choosing to interview Kamala, and you can see why. Well, of course they're going to pick the journalist who says that Kamala doesn't need to answer questions, to ask Kamala the questions. That is an obvious hack for the campaign. But here is a wireless hack that can cut your cell phone bill in half every single month. The big phone providers want you to believe you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. Well, here's the fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you will ever need. With Pure Talk, my cell phone company, you can choose how much data you actually want and you can save. Listen to this. For just $35 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data, plus mobile hotspot on America's most dependable 5G network. You know what you can do with that much data? You can browse the internet for 500 hours. You can stream 3,000 songs. You can watch 30 hours of video. That's if you're not on Wi-Fi. Here's the best part. When you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk on a qualifying plan, you'll get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. That's access to the full library of DW Plus movies, series, and documentaries, including Lady Ballers, What is a Woman, Mr. Bertram, and Run, Hide, Fight. Plus, uncensored ad-free daily shows, 1 year free of our kids' platform Bentkey, and your very own free Leftist Tears Tumblr. The only way you can actually do that is by going to puretalk.com/Shapiro, call and mention my name. Stop overpaying for your cell phone plan right now. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro today, switch to that qualifying plan, get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. But meanwhile, Kamala Harris is, in fact, saying some of the most dangerous things in modern American politics. I'm not just talking about the stuff she said back in 2019. We'll get to that in a moment, because every single day there's a new revelation of something nuts she said in 2019, and then she'll be asked about it and she'll run screaming to the hills with her hair on fire. I'm talking about the stuff she's saying right now. So yesterday, Kamala Harris made clear her most radical proposition. She was asked about killing the filibuster, and here's what she had to say.
I've been very clear. I think we should eliminate the filibuster for Roe, and we need and get us to the point where 51 votes would be what we need to actually put back in law the protections for reproductive freedom and for the ability of every person and every woman to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do.
And so first of all, it's not even clear whether the federal Congress has the authority to do that. If you're talking about like an interstate crime, then perhaps. If you're talking about like an intrastate crime, which is what criminalizing late-term abortion, for example, in many states does, not clear that the federal government has the authority to simply reinstate Roe by fiat of Congress. But that's not the point. The point is that she wants to kill the filibuster. And the filibuster, for those who are unfamiliar with the legal jargon, the filibuster is effectively a 60-vote threshold to pass controversial legislation in Congress. And there's some workarounds. There's some financial workarounds. If there's a budget bill, for example, there's a process called budget sequestration in which you can use 51 votes to basically trump the filibuster. But the filibuster tries to guarantee that there is widespread agreement about a policy before it passes. So, for example, it made a big difference with Obamacare that Democrats had 60 votes in the Senate thanks to a rigged race between Al Franken and Norm Coleman in Minnesota that achieved a 60th vote for them that allowed Obamacare to pass with 60 votes. They overcame the filibuster. The filibuster usually has been applied to a wide variety of circumstances, and Democrats have played around with it. So the Democrats, for a while, used the filibuster against judicial nominees. And it turns out that that was not a good idea. And then they killed the filibuster for judicial nominees when it was on their side. And that allowed Mitch McConnell to put in place a bunch of federal justices and federal judges who are of the right side of the aisle in terms of originalism. And bottom line is this. The filibuster is the slowdown process available in Congress to maintain the constitutional idea that there ought to be broad-scale agreement on major shifts in American policy. It requires 60 votes in order to go forward. Now, that filibuster can be changed. It's a rule. It is not a constitutional provision. But it has become sort of the last resort of bipartisanship in the Congress as the administrative state has grown and as we've changed the constitutional rules and as the scope of the federal government has grown. There used to be all sorts of checks and balances in the original constitutional structure against Congress moving really fast in really broad ways. Namely, it was a Congress of delegated powers. And if you actually weren't acting within the delegated powers, well, then the states wouldn't pay attention to you or the Supreme Court would strike it down. And then over the course of the 20th century, the executive branch started to assume extraordinary functions that really belonged to the legislature. They would just, through regulation, do massive things. Congress expanded its purview to include pretty much everything that, quote unquote, affected interstate commerce. And the Supreme Court, which had been packed by the left, effectively decided that it was going to allow Congress to usurp all of that authority. So as the authority of the federal Congress increased, the filibuster became the brake on that process. And it wasn't an interminable break. You could overcome it. There's an attempt to filibuster, for example, the Civil Rights Act, and that failed. There have been many attempts to filibuster particular acts of Congress, and those filibusters have failed. However, the general standard which is that for a big change in American public life, you have to at least overcome a filibuster. You have to show that the American people, writ large, have elected people who, broadly speaking, agree with one another. That has been a provision that has kept the United States in a state of semi-solidity with regard to its politics for a long time. Incrementalism is one of the effects of the filibuster. You have to move more slowly than you otherwise would. Otherwise, this government would look very much like the parliamentary governments that you see in Europe. For example, when one side takes the majority, they simply put into place everything they want. The other side comes back in, they put in place everything they want, and policy swivels wildly from side to side. The United States was not built for that. It was built for gridlock. The filibuster is an element of that gridlock. Kamala Harris wanting to kill the filibuster with regard to Roe basically means she wants to kill the filibuster with regard to everything. If you kill the filibuster, understand that it's not just with regard to Roe versus Wade. She's saying she wants to kill the filibuster with regard to Roe versus Wade, and because she wants to put back in place federal legislation that forces legal abortion on the states. But it's not just for that. The real goal here is much broader. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, he says that they will consider killing the filibuster. Here he was yesterday.
President Harris endorsed a filibuster carve-out for codifying Roe. What is your reaction to that?
It's something our caucus will discuss in the next session of Congress.
Okay, so they're going to discuss it. What they really mean is they would love to do it. If Democrats take the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and they kill the filibuster, what you will end up with is a permanent rigging of the American government on behalf of Democrats. That is the goal. That is why this is so radical. Understand, ain't just about abortion. I promise you, with 51 votes, Democrats will kill the filibuster, and then they will attempt to create 2 new states through congressional fiat. They'll create a state of Washington, D.C., which will have 2 permanent Democratic senators, thus permanently shifting the balance of power in the Senate on behalf of Democrats. They'll also presumably add Puerto Rico as a state represented in the United States Senate. Now, historically speaking, when states were added to the federal government, to the federal Senate, when those states were added, typically you would have a state that was added that was a Democrat state and a Republican state. This is why Alaska and Hawaii actually entered the Union at about the same time. The reason is, believe it or not, at the time, Alaska was a Democrat state and Hawaii was a Republican state. Now, of course, they've switched places. But what Democrats want to do is add 4 seats to the Senate and thereby guarantee themselves a permanent working majority. And having killed the filibuster, they can then do whatever they want. They can pack the Supreme Court. They can limit jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. They can run roughshod over all the checks and balances. And this has been a progressive Democratic goal since the beginning of the 20th century. If you go back to Woodrow Wilson was openly talking about how the Constitution was basically a document written by befuddled, dead white men in order to stop the march of progress. And what you really needed was a powerful, centralized government, he thought located in the presidency, in order to ram through the change that you needed. The administrative state really gets its start under Woodrow Wilson for precisely this reason. He famously suggested the president should be as big a man as the law allows. And he wanted the law to allow the presidency to be really, really big. That's what Democrats want. Democrats want to get rid of the checks and balances. That is their goal. Now, of course, the sword can swing both ways. When Democrats originally got rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees on behalf of their own judicial nominees, they then allowed Mitch McConnell to do the same with regard to his judicial nominees on the Republican side of the aisle. However, Democrats are not thinking about that. What they are thinking about is how do we permanently rig the rules of the game so that Republicans can never again control the branches of government. That is their goal. By the way, they want to do this in the House as well. Well, if rewriting the constitutional structure is something that might cause you to lose some sleep, then perhaps you need a Helix sleep mattress. A couple years back, I was tossing and turning all night. Then I decided to try a Helix mattress. Let me tell you, it is a game changer. So here's what's great about Helix. They have 20 different mattresses. They've got the Luxe for your fancy types, the Elite for the extra fancy. They've got the Helix Plus for the big fellas, the kind of dudes who love to eat beef but really hate soy. Now, you might be thinking, Ben, how do I know which one is right for me? The answer is you take that Helix Sleep quiz. It's quick, it's easy, it takes less than 2 minutes. I took the quiz myself. I was matched with a medium firm mattress, which is perfect because if the mattress is too soft, I get back pain. Here's another great thing about Helix. They ship your personalized mattress directly to your door free of charge. No dealing with mattress salesmen or about as trustworthy as legacy media fact checkers. And get this, they give you 100 nights to try it out. Plus, there's a 10 to 15-year warranty. So if you want to sleep as soundly as I do, head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben. Take that sleep quiz. Plus, Helix is offering up to 25% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben. That's helixsleep.com/Ben. With Helix, better sleep starts right now. One of their first moves would be to kill the filibuster, presumably, for things like the John Lewis Act, which is an act designed to enshrine ballot harvesting as federal law, allowing Democratic front groups to go out and effectively just go house to house to all of their friends, pick up their ballots and shovel those in the mailbox, whether or not those people were really interested in voting or not. Basically, the more you pay your get out the vote effort, the more votes you get. Not because you're convincing anybody, but because you geo-target all of the people you want, and then you go to the homeless guy and you give him a ballot and you say, I want you to punch these things, and then you bring it back in. The Democrats, presumably, would then force through the so-called Equality Act, which is a complete violation of religious freedom in the United States. And when you say, okay, well, if you were to push that through, then the Supreme Court would fight back. Yes, and then that will be used as the predicate by a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House in order to pack the Supreme Court, in order to forcibly retire Republican-appointed justices. So when people say that this election really, really matters, it wouldn't matter so much if people weren't screwing around with the mechanisms of government itself. I've said this to Democrats throughout this race. Democrats are constantly saying, Donald Trump, he's a threat to democracy. Look at him, a threat to democracy, with all of his January 6th and all of his election talk and denialism and all. And what I've said to them is this. I didn't like a lot of what Donald Trump said between election 2020 and January 6th. I thought that he was saying things that were legally untrue. And when he was talking about how the vice president had the unilateral ability to simply negate state-certified votes, I thought that that was not true. However, Donald Trump's various blasphemies with regard to the constitutional system were not, in fact, a threat to the constitutional system. Joe Biden has threatened the constitutional system, not only by activating elements of the executive branch to ram down things like vaccine mandates that are well outside their purview. We literally had to sue the federal government to stop that, by the way. Not only that, but by opening the door to fundamentally rewriting the actual structures of how the government works in order to enshrine a permanent majority. That is actual screwing around with the republic. And if that becomes the case, if it becomes, anytime you have an electoral democracy, a republic, anytime you have that, there's a bargain that takes place between the citizens and their government. That bargain is, we will all abide by the rules because we understand that in the next election, we might be the ones in control. That has always been the bargain of any Democratic or Republican form of government, has been the idea that when you vote, you might lose this time, but you might win next time. If the rules of the game are permanently rigged in favor of one side, that is not a republic that will last. Because what it means is that you now have a dictatorship of the supposed majority. And a dictatorship of the majority is not likely to be abided by the disaffected minority. That it's exactly why the founding fathers put in place all of these checks and balances. So it sounds dull and dry. When she says, I'll ditch the filibuster, it sounds dull and dry. It is not dull and dry. Getting rid of the Senate filibuster, if Democrats have a majority in the House and the Senate, and Kamala Harris is the president, it does in fact mean the end of the current functioning of the United States government and the entry into an imperial period of complete democratic dominance. It is in fact rigging the rules. It is in fact changing the structure of American government. It is wildly dangerous. And then the only locus of resistance becomes the states. Then you have governors who simply say, we don't think this is legitimate and we're not going to do it. Come and take it. It ratchets up the temperature. It doesn't ratchet down the temperature in the country. It ratchets it wildly up. Because the common agreement, which is that we at least have to, if we're going to play a game, then there has to be a shot that either of us can win. That goes away. Democrats want to rig this thing permanently, and that's what Kamala Harris is saying. This is one of the reasons why Joe Manchin, who's not going to be sitting in the Senate anymore, he's leaving, and Jim Justice is going to take his seat in West Virginia. Joe Manchin said he's not going to endorse Kamala Harris specifically because of her desire to kill the filibuster, because Manchin, who has worked across the aisle, now Manchin's a Democrat, but he's worked across the aisle, Manchin understands that what she's talking about threatens the very fabric of the republic.
Also, would you endorse her for president then?
I'm not endorsing her. I'm not endorsing her.
Okay.
Okay, so that is an amazing statement by Joe Manchin. And Americans should understand just how dangerous Kamala Harris is. She is not brat. She is not cool. She is, like Barack Obama and Joe Biden before her, somebody who wants to fundamentally change the way that government works in the United States. Now, there are some Democrats who are attempting to make a pragmatic case for why Democrats shouldn't end the filibuster. They say, you should act with caution. But the reality is that as the AOC wing of the party takes over, there's going to be more and more pressure, obviously, for Democrats to change the actual functioning rules. And they're going to do so on behalf of some of the most insane policy ever. This is the reason, by the way, why Kamala Harris will not commit to rejecting her old policies. Remember, she has said that you shouldn't take any of the things she said in 2019 all that seriously. She was running for president at the time. It was a much more left-wing Democratic Party. The American public was much more open to radical, stupid ideas. But she refuses to walk away from any of the policies in terms of whether she would implement them. So flashback to 2019. Here's Kamala Harris saying that she would, quote unquote, decriminalize sex work, which means make prostitution legal across the country.
Do you think that sex work ought to be decriminalized?
I think so. I do. I think that we have to understand, though, that it is not as simple as that. It is also about there is an ecosystem around that includes crimes that harm people.
Okay, so that was her wanting to decriminalize that. Now, would she sign a bill on that? She won't say. How do you know she won't say? Because she literally won't say about anything. So, for example, Kamala Harris has spent 2 decades opposing the death penalty. She opposed the death penalty so strongly that she refused to apply it while she was Attorney General. She would just not go for it while she was Attorney General of the state of California. Well, in a shift, the Democratic Party changed its official platform this summer to remove opposition to the death penalty. That, of course, the opposition to the death penalty is a very unpopular view among Americans who see child molesters who murder children as people who probably should not be breathing the same air, a proposition with which I heartily agree. However, Kamala Harris was asked whether she would support legislation or would sign an executive order to end the death penalty. And her campaign, once again, would not respond. And this is the way that she has been acting throughout the campaign. She'll send out surrogates to shift a position, and then when asked if she will still sign the bill with her original position, she'll go AWOL. This is the reason why she won't answer questions. Because she still believes all the things she used to believe. And she will change the rules in order to achieve those things. Well, Kamala Harris constantly runs away from questions, but you can't run away from life. That's not something you can do. And that means you gotta stay healthy. Right now, I'm moving all around the country because of the election. I'm constantly on the go. That means I can't afford to get very, very sick. So that means I exercise. I try to get enough sleep. I eat well, and Balance of Nature fits into my day-to-day. Imagine trying to eat 31 different fruits and veggies every single day. That sounds miserable and time-consuming. With Balance of Nature fruits and veggies, there's never been a more convenient dietary supplement to ensure you get a wide variety of fruits and veggies daily. Balance of Nature takes fruits and veggies, they freeze-dry them, they turn them into a powder, and then they put them into a capsule. You take your fruit and veggie capsules every day, and then your body knows precisely what to do with them. It's kosher, which means I can just pop those things right into the protein smoothie. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get a free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. And again, when you use that promo code Shapiro, you get 35% off your first order as a preferred customer and a free bottle of fiber and spice. Go check them out right now, balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. And so again, she's playing this double game. I'm not sure that it's going to work in this campaign. She's playing this double game where you are supposed to pretend that she is a well-established figure with a set of principles, but if you ask her about the principles, it's really bad. So she's simultaneously avoiding the cameras, but then showing up for the cameras to shake hands and give the goofy grin and make weird hand motions. One of the things that she has been doing, by the way, is avoiding these so-called Al Smith dinners. There's a big dinner that happens every year. It's sort of this source of much revelry in New York. It goes back decades at this point. The Al Smith dinner is where a bunch of candidates show up and then they make jokes. So there's all sorts of video, for example, of Donald Trump showing up to the Al Smith dinner and making some self-referential jokes. Everyone that I'm aware of, every candidate, Democrat, Republican, has showed up to the Al Smith dinner and read some jokes written by professional comedians. Kamala Harris has bowed out. The question is why? And the answer is because Kamala Harris cannot be seen making jokes. She cannot. She's not capable of doing humor. She's not capable of being a regular, normal human. I understand there's, again, this attempt to turn her into a regular person. Kamala Harris is not a regular person. Kamala Harris literally had to have her campaign staff in 2019, 2020 do a mock dinner party in order so she could prep for a real dinner party. I don't know how many times you've had to do that. Like actually set out silverware in China in order to mock up a dinner party because it's so important you do well at this donor dinner. That's not something normies do. But she's not quite normal. So here is Cardinal Dolan of New York saying he was disappointed she won't attend the Al Smith dinner. I think there's another reason, which is she's so wildly pro-abortion. And her administration would, in fact, be wildly anti-Catholic because Catholic social teachings are directly opposed to the Kamala Harris individual authenticity, live your truth, pro-abortion platform. I think that would have been a problem for her. Here's Cardinal Dolan lamenting.
You know, she speaks very much about the high ideals and how it's good to get away from division and come together in unity and all. Well, that's what the Al Smith dinner is all about. We haven't given up yet. We're not used to this. We don't know how to handle it. This hasn't happened in 40 years since Walter Mondale turned down the invitation. And remember, he lost 49 out of 50 states. I don't want to say there's a direct connection there. But so we're not used to this, and we're not giving up. You know who's been a help to us, Lauren, is Senator Schumer and Governor Hochul. They both are working hard to see that they convince her to come.
So there's still a chance.
Yeah, and Senator Schumer said to me, he said, I don't think she made the decision. I think her schedulers are saying she can't make it. So we're not giving up.
She definitely made the decision. This is a very high-profile dinner. That decision does not get made without her input. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, he is getting more disciplined, as I suggested that he has to. And I think everyone, it's not unique to me, has suggested he must. On the campaign trail, he's attacking her with alacrity on the two top issues for Americans, the economy and immigration. Here he was yesterday on the campaign trail, speaking in Georgia about Kamala's plan with regard to illegal immigration.
Kamala's illegals are also crushing your wages and stealing your jobs. Last month alone, think of this, American-born workers lost 1.3 million jobs and migrants gained 635,000 jobs. So we're putting our migrants to work at a much higher level than our own people, our own citizens.
Trump also went off on her yesterday with regard to her tax policies. This is in Pennsylvania. Trump is hitting the campaign trail harder in these later weeks, as he should be.
Kamala Harris is the tax queen, and she's coming for your money, she's coming for your pensions, and she's coming for your savings unless you defeat her in November and want to take away your guns. Remember that. Always remember that.
He is right about all of that. Well, Kamala's tax plan is not going to work for you, but there is something that will work for you: efficient business finance management. If you want to know how to run your company's finances smoother than a well-oiled machine, you need to check out Ramp. Ramp is a corporate card and spend management software. It's designed to help you save time and put money back in your pocket. Ramp gives your finance team unprecedented control over company spending. You can issue cards to every employee with actual limits and restrictions, a novel concept in today's world of runaway expenses. Ramp's accounting software automatically collects receipts and categorizes your expenses in real time. No more chasing down receipts like a dog after a squirrel. Your employees won't waste hours on expense reports, allowing you to close your books 8 times faster. Unlike most so-called money-saving solutions, Ramp actually puts cash back in your pocket. Businesses using Ramp save an average of 5% in their very first year. Plus, it's easier to set up than my son's Lego sets. You can get started, issue virtual and physical cards, and start making payments in less than 15 minutes, whether you have 5 employees or 5,000. And now you get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/Shapiro. That's ramp.com/Shapiro, ramp.com/Shapiro. Cards issued by Sutton Bank, member FDIC. Terms and conditions apply. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, again, on the economy, she's lagging. And there are some indicators that the economy is not quite as sanguine as the Federal Reserve would make it out to be. Yesterday, CNBC's Rick Santelli pointed out there was a huge miss on consumer confidence, that Americans are feeling a little squirrely about the economy, that actually the injection of new money into the system by lowering the interest rates by the Federal Reserve, that actually is not quieting a lot of concerns.
We are looking at some big misses here on consumer confidence. We're expecting a headline number to be around 104. 98.7. That is the weakest going back to July of 22. July of 22, when it was 95.3. So these are definitely weaker than expected numbers.
Hey, not just that. As investor John Paulson pointed out yesterday, real wages grew almost 8% under Donald Trump. They've been down about 2% under Joe Biden. That is a big delta.
Under Trump, real wages grew 7.7%.
Under Biden, they've declined 2.1%. So the American worker is the most vulnerable. So the tax policies he articulated, no tax on tip, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, they benefit the people that need the help the most to restore their income so they can meet the higher cost of living today.
Okay. Meanwhile, the Harris co-chair is out there suggesting, this is Chris Coons, that the real problem is the American people just don't understand their own feelings about the economy. By the way, whenever you're arguing this, you're losing. This is a rule in American politics. If the American people have a perception about a thing, whether they are right or whether they are wrong, if you argue that they just are misunderstanding, that they just don't get it, if you're arguing that, you're losing because all of those people's feelings matter in the sense that they are going to vote. Again, they might be wrong, but they ain't going to vote based on you telling them that they are misfeeling or something. Here's Senator Chris Coons.
Many Americans misremember just how bad the economy was 4 years ago and how strong our economic recovery from the pandemic has been.
Oh, they're misremembering. That's it. That's really the issue. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris pushing out every inflationary policy she can think of. As Edward Pinto points out at the Wall Street Journal, her housing plan is going to inflate the prices on housing and create shortages. Quote, a signature feature of Kamala Harris's housing plan is providing first-time home buyers with $25,000 in down payment support at a total cost of $100 billion over 4 years. Absent a severe recession, this policy is all but certain to lead to higher home prices. That's because the 4 million program recipients would become price setters for all buyers in their neighborhood. According to the American Enterprise Institute's Housing Center, 77% of all home purchases would be subject to this home buyer tax, causing the price of those homes to increase by 3.6%. Over 4 years, the increase in home prices would total $175 billion, more than the $100 billion cost of the program. The price increase would show up in higher revenue for sellers, thus acting as a wealth transfer to people who are trying to sell. However, the problem is that if you don't actually increase the supply, then the prices will just continue to go up. And right now, the supply is not going to increase because of all the regulations. Also, because Kamala Harris and her team all over the country keep pushing idiocies like rent control. Now, the truth is that there is a really easy way to bring down the price of rent and the price of mortgages, and that's make it easier to build. Get rid of rent control. How do we know this? Because over in Argentina, where Javier Milei has been wielding the chainsaw that he promised he would wield, he has just completely scrapped rent controls, and now the real estate market is doing amazing. It's actually not all that hard. According to the Wall Street Journal, for years, Argentina imposed one of the world's strictest rent control laws. Now the country's new president, Javier Milei, has scrapped the rental law along with most government price controls in a fiscal experiment that he is conducting to revive South America's second biggest economy. The result, the Argentine capital is undergoing a rental market boom. Landlords are rushing to put their properties back on the market, with Buenos Aires rental supplies increasing by over 170%. While rents are still up in nominal terms, many renters are getting better deals than ever, with a 40% decline in the real price of rental properties when adjusted for inflation since last October. In other words, his economic shock therapy is working. It turns out deregulation of the economy leads to lower prices and better products. Precisely the opposite of what is promised by Kamala Harris and her economic team. This is why Americans don't trust Kamala Harris on the economy or on anything else. And this is an insuperable problem for her. Again, she has gotten the best 8 weeks of media coverage in human history. And she is currently leading in the national polling average by maybe 2%. And in the states, she's not leading at all. In fact, it appears that the gap that emerged between Harris and Trump after she jumped in is starting to close again. It's never been very big, and it's starting to close again. And if you look at the swing state polls, what you see is that every single, I'll repeat this until the cows come home, every single swing state is within the margin of error. And they seem to be moving just a little bit back toward Trump at this point. And it's only going to get worse for her. Because what can she do to make fetch happen? What can she do to recapture the magic? Not much. And then there are the exogenous events. One of those big exogenous events is happening right now in the Middle East. A ground invasion by Israel into Lebanon is going to come. It is going to happen because it has to happen, because Hezbollah's rocket capabilities must be dismantled by the Israelis before they reestablish any level of command and control. The Israelis are currently conducting one of the most sophisticated and successful military operations in all of human history. And Kamala Harris is probably going to oppose it. We'll get to that in just 1 second. First, Matt Walsh's blockbuster Am I Racist? It's the biggest political documentary opening in 20 years. Okay, but if you recall, he actually made a documentary before that, and it was awesome. That movie was What is a Woman? The groundbreaking documentary that became Matt's first cultural phenomenon. For my money, Am I Racist? What is a Woman? These are the two best documentaries of the last 20 years in America. What is a Woman tackles one of the most debated questions of our time. Matt's journey to find an answer has captivated audiences across the world. The best part is you can stream it right now over at Daily Wire Plus. If you're not a Daily Wire Plus member, go to dailywire.com/subscribe and join the fight today. Use code DW30 for 30% off your new Daily Wire Plus membership. Meanwhile, there is a major exogenous world event, and it is going to negatively impact the Harris campaign. Why? Because the Harris-Biden White House has been a disaster area on the Middle East throughout this entire October 7th conflict and before. The Biden-Harris campaign that White House set the Middle East on fire. They actively dissociated from the Saudis. They actively dissociated from the Israelis. They decided to side with the Palestinians. They decided to side with the Iranians. They decided they were going to, quote unquote, reopen negotiations with some of the world's worst people. And then it turns out the Iranians activated their proxies on every front against Israel in an attempt to forestall any sort of deal between the Israelis and the Saudis. Well, now Israel is fighting back and they're flexing their muscle. They are currently involved in the most sophisticated and successful military operation probably in modern history, in what they have been doing in Lebanon. From the beeper operation to Operation blowing up the walkie-talkies to taking out 50% of all long-range munitions of Hezbollah inside of 24 hours. They are currently targeting Hezbollah so thoroughly that Hezbollah has been left with significant shortages of ability to actually fire on Israel. So last night they fired a cruise missile at Tel Aviv. It was shot down by David Sling, which is sort of a longer range version of the famed Iron Dome. They've been shooting down rockets pretty much daily now that are flying toward Haifa. Israel, its population, has suffered, I believe, one fatal casualty at this point, compared to the hundreds of people who have died who are Hezbollah members or associated with Hezbollah or hanging out in the apartments above Hezbollah in targeted strikes. Some 500,000 Lebanese have fled areas where they were directly next to Hezbollah emplacements. And now Israel is presumably going to have to conduct some sort of ground operation in southern Lebanon to reinsure their own security. There's been talk about them moving to the Litani River, which is a few dozen miles into Lebanon, and then reestablishing a security cordon there. They might actually have to move north of that. There are a bunch of rivers in Lebanon that sort of cut horizontally across the country. Israel may have to move further north than the Litani River in order to ensure the security of the state of Israel. And for those who are complaining, why isn't the UN doing it? The answer is Israel tried to have the UN do it, and the UN immediately gave it over to Hezbollah in 2000. Israel completely withdrew from Lebanon in the year 2000. This is not a territorial dispute. This is one country attacking another country and then getting its ass kicked. The problem, of course, is that this creates a problem for Kamala Harris. When Israel wins, many people on Kamala Harris' side of the aisle do not like it, which is why, presumably, the Biden-Harris administration continues to slow walk aid to Israel in a fight with an adversarial terror group. Today, Senators Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell sent a letter to Joe Biden pointing out that the administration is delaying three critical types of military weapons or equipment: MK-84 bombs, which are bombs required to hit Hamas's deeply buried tunnels and military infrastructure in Gaza, as well as Hezbollah tunnels; Apache attack helicopters. They're not fast-tracking or approving the sale of Apache attack helicopters, especially given the war in Gaza; and Caterpillar D9 tractors, which is what the IDF uses to clear IEDs from in front of its troops. So, again, this administration trying to have it both ways. And the reason they're doing that, of course, is specifically because of their radical left. It's because they themselves hold a brief for the idea that weakness equals virtue in the world. And that if you are an evil terrorist group, that just means that you are really, really oppressed. That's why you're evil and that's why you're a terrorist. It's because you were super duper oppressed. And thus we must have sympathy for you. I saw the foolish singer Joan Baez suggesting as much. Well, the terrorists don't even have a chance against the Israelis. Yes, and that's good. That's a good thing, because one side is really, really evil, and that would be the Islamist terrorists. Okay, but, again, the left does hold a brief for terrorism that ranges, among all of the left's greatest stars. Greta Thunberg, who I can now make fun of as much as I want, because Greta is no longer under the age of 18, so she can't chide the adults. She's now one of us. Well, as an adult, Greta, you might at some point want to read a book. The fact that Greta Thunberg was ever put out there as some sort of moral exemplar is absolutely beyond me, and she demonstrates her absolute intellectual inferiority every time she opens her dumb mouth. Here she was calling for a Palestinian boycott against Chevron. This is going to work.
But the oil giant is also fueling Israel's genocide in Palestine. As Israel
genocide in
bombs
Palestine.
Homes, and schools
and she's
in
wearing the
Gaza,
terrorist keffiyeh, of course.
Supplies them with energy from 2 Israeli-claimed gas fields in the Mediterranean, making millions in the
Israeli
process.
claimed Israel fracked them.
Israel's genocide in Gaza
Israel drilled those
and
fields.
Israeli apartheid is a climate justice issue. Israel is destroying Palestinian lives, but also destroying Palestinian lands and resources through its warfare and industries that pollute and destroy the environment. We cannot stand by and do nothing. I'm joining.
Okay, we don't need to listen to more of this idiot. And it's incredible that anyone ever pretended that this person had any level of moral authority whatsoever. It remains an astonishing thing. Meanwhile, other morons who have been treated as voices that matter, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay, I'm just confused as to why anyone ever pretended that Ta-Nehisi Coates either is a good writer or a good thinker. He is a simpleton. His writing is terrible. It's purple and it's garbage, and it uses ridiculous adjectives where simple sentences would do. He is deliberately obfuscatory. He is oblique. He just fills pages and pages with pseudo-poetic garbage, trash. He's the person who made the phrase black bodies the most ubiquitous, as though black people don't have bodies until he said black bodies. He's always been a fool. And in the Black Lives Matter moment, he was treated as some sort of great public intellectual. What he really is a dumb knockoff version of James Baldwin without any of the intellectual savoir-faire. He's always been a joke. His first book, Between the World and Me, is a piece of tripe in which he explicitly talks about sitting on a rooftop watching the towers go down on 9/11 and feeling nothing because one time a cop was mean to him. The fact that anyone takes him seriously is beyond me, but the New Yorker put him on the cover of New Yorker magazine to talk about, of all things, Israel and the Palestinians. Because again, the Omni cause. Why? So they sent him there for 2 weeks. He doesn't speak Arabic. He doesn't speak Hebrew. He doesn't know anything about the geography of the region. He literally knows nothing. He goes over there. He sees people who are living in poverty. He immediately assumes they're like black Americans. And because in his own mind, black Americans are an oppressed class, this means that the Palestinians who support terrorism are an oppressed class. And thus it is just a simple debate between good and evil, victim and victimizer, always for Ta-Nehisi Coates. The fact that anyone treated this guy as worthy of winning things like the Pulitzer Prize is absolutely insane. Okay, but they did trot him out on the cover of a magazine. We all have to pretend that he knows things, even though he doesn't know anything. These are the kinds of people that Kamala Harris is pandering to. Or maybe she's pandering to University of Michigan students who are protesting yesterday in favor of Hamas. When I say in favor of Hamas, I mean literally in favor of Hamas. They're walking with a sign in this march that says Gaza to Beirut, one struggle, and it has the upside down red triangles. Those upside down red triangles, by the way, the reason those are important, that is the marking that Hamas puts on potential targets for bombings. So you have terrorist supporters marching through University of Michigan. Of course, these are the people that Kamala Harris is seeking to win over. Hands off the Middle East, except for Islamist terrorist groups who should be able to run the place. Those are the people Kamala Harris is attempting to pander to. Meanwhile, by the way, Iran is literally attempting to kill Donald Trump, like right now. The Trump campaign even put out a statement about it. Quote, President Trump was briefed earlier today by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence regarding real and specific threats from Iran to assassinate him in an effort to destabilize and sow chaos in the United States. Intelligence officials have identified that these continued and coordinated attacks have heightened in the past few months, and law enforcement officials across all agencies are working to ensure President Trump is protected and the election is free from interference. Make no mistake, the terror regime in Iran loves the weakness of Kamala Harris and is terrified of the strength and resolve of President Trump. He'll let nothing stop him or get in his way to fight for the American people and to make America great again. And of course, that is correct. Iran is actively waiting for President Harris. This is why what's going on in the Middle East has some ramifications for the election. Americans look at the conflict in the Middle East. They don't like it. We don't like conflict. We don't like war. In fact, we prefer that wars be won by the correct side fast. And you know who's standing in the way of that? The administration that attempted to kowtow to the Iranians. Today, the United States offered visa waivers to Qatar. Qatar, of course, is an Iranian ally. So that's what Kamala Harris is going to have to fend off. As this war continues, which it will, because Hezbollah is not going to surrender anytime. That would be too humiliating for them. Hilariously, I think that the best tweet of the day, full credit to the Iranian dictator, Ayatollah Khamenei. Full credit to that guy. He actually tweeted out in the middle of Hezbollah getting just absolutely wrecked. Hezbollah is the victor. Okay, then. Okay, but this is going to be a problem for Kamala Harris because, on the one hand, Americans really don't like surrender to terrorist groups. In fact, Israel is kind of a popular proposition in the United States. On the other side, she's got a bunch of terror supporters in her own caucus. So she will get caught between a rock and a hard place, which is why I think you are seeing the Trump campaign doing a good job by just standing there and pointing the finger at Kamala Harris and defining her. That's the whole race. Well, if you were betting right now, you wouldn't want to bet on Hezbollah. Things are bad over there, but betting with BetOnline can be fun. Beyond traditional sports, BetOnline gives you the option to bet on political events like the outcome of the presidential election. Right now, it's a toss-up. Or if you're a sports fan, BetOnline makes sports betting more accessible and convenient than ever before. BetOnline is an awesome place to be. Producer Jake recently placed a bet on whether the October 23rd CNN debate will happen or not. Jake doesn't think it'll happen, so he bet no. That, I think, is a solid bet. With just a few clicks, you can place bets on your favorite teams or events from the comfort of your own home. BetOnline prides themselves on their higher-than-average betting limits of up to $25,000, and you can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So, while you're watching your favorite team or the news on upcoming elections, why not spice things up with a friendly wager at BetOnline? Go to betonline.ag to place your bets today. Use promo code BEN for a 50% sign-up bonus of up to $250. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN. BetOnline, the options are endless. Once more, use promo code BEN when you go to betonline.ag. And when you do, you'll get a 50% sign-up bonus of up to $250. Joining us online is Trey Yingst. He's chief foreign correspondent for Fox News. He's been reporting in enormous respects from the Middle East, obviously, over the course of the last year. He has a brand new book releasing October 1st titled Black Saturday, an unfiltered account of the October 7th attack on Israel and the war in Gaza. Trey, thanks for the work you're doing, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben.
So first of all, I assume you're in the Middle East right now, given all of the events that are happening on the ground over there. What is your latest update on the situation on the ground? The Israeli military is performing what appears to be one of the most successful military operations in the early stages that has happened in modern military history.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now I'm reporting on the ground in Israel's third largest city of Haifa. And as I'm overlooking the port here in Haifa, we have seen a number of rockets incoming even today. Israel's missile defense system, the Iron Dome, is intercepting much of the fire that is targeting these communities across northern Israel. But today, Hezbollah escalated their attacks, firing a ballistic missile toward Israel's second largest city of Tel Aviv. And so there's a real understanding on the ground that while Israel is doing what they can to reduce Hezbollah's capabilities with the Israeli Air Force, they are preparing for the possibility of a ground operation into southern Lebanon. And even just a few moments ago, the Israelis announced they will be calling up 2 reserve brigades to ensure that the ground forces are in place if that decision is made.
And we've been told by sources and by the Israeli government that their estimate is that they've taken out about 50% of the long-range weaponry that Hezbollah had stored in places ranging from southern Lebanon to the Bekaa Valley, which is sort of to the east, the northeast of Lebanon. That still leaves an enormous number of short-range rockets, obviously intact, and Hezbollah is heavily manned up along that southern border, although it appears they've lost much of their command and control structure. It's the leadership of Hezbollah appears to be meeting in a room alone. The only person being alive at the top of the structure appears to be Hassan Nasrallah at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And the Israelis launched this campaign to target Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and even their positions in the north to try and reduce those rocket and missile capabilities. And Israeli officials, as recently as last year, before October 7th, when this all began, were briefing that they believed if Hezbollah launched an attack against Israel, the early days of that war would see thousands of rockets and missiles raining down on Israeli cities. It would see blackouts and really challenging situations, not just for the northern part of Israel, but also the central part. That hasn't happened to that degree. And this is in part to the proactive stance that Israel has taken to try and target these launching positions. It was also just a few weeks ago that we saw Hezbollah was preparing a massive barrage. Israeli intelligence picked that up and they were able to conduct preemptive strikes. So we are seeing the Israeli intelligence and military capabilities operating together. They are trying to target as many of these positions as possible, understanding that, as you said, they still have the capability to launch things like ballistic missiles toward major population centers like Tel Aviv. And this is a significant threat, and it could be coupled with intense and increased fighting with a ground operation.
You know, Trey, one of the things I think that when I talk to Israelis has been striking about the current operation is how efficient, how thorough it has been in comparison with what happened on October 7th, which, of course, is the subject of your book, Black Saturday. Well, one of the things that I think was so shocking to the Israeli psyche, and frankly to the Western psyche generally, is there was this idea that the Israeli intelligence apparatus was extremely effective, very, very good. And we've seen them flex that muscle over the course of the last couple of months, from the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran to the Beeper operation in Lebanon. And yet October 7th took the Israelis completely by surprise. I remember waking up on the morning of Simchat Torah over here in the United States, and obviously I'm Orthodox, we weren't picking up the phone. We started getting updates from security, friends and family who are under assault in cities in the southern area of Israel in the so-called Gaza envelope. So why don't you tell me about the situation, on October 7th from your perspective, because that's what the book is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I write about this throughout Black Saturday, my experience going to the Gaza border on that morning, not knowing that this was an infiltration of Israel. At the time, my team and I thought this was a rocket attack, as we'd seen many times in the past. And so there was a clear intelligence failure in the Israeli military and government about what the preparations were in the days before October 7th. I mean, to have thousands of these gunmen cross into Israel, into these communities that were largely unprotected along the border, and slaughter people in their homes. And the Israeli army simply didn't get there in time to take the battle back to Hamas. And that is why so many people were killed and why so many were dragged into Gaza as hostages of Hamas. And so on Black Saturday, my team and I went to the border. We were aiming to go to a town called Sderot that has about 30,000 people. Many people who have visited Israel have been to this community because you can look right into Gaza. It's a community that's filled with bomb shelters. But as we drove there and we got closer, we stopped at one intersection and got out of the car because we saw an ambulance pulled over. And that's when we heard the gunfire. And this was the first indication that this attack was different than anything we'd seen before covering the region for the past 10 years. And the book takes the reader not just through my perspective on that morning, also from the perspective of Israeli soldiers, of civilians, of hostages who were taken into Gaza and then later released as part of the November ceasefire deal. I interviewed people who were held in the tunnels beneath Gaza. I also speak with Palestinian civilians and Hamas officials, pressing them on the questions that I had about the massacre that took place on October 7th, and then some of the things that unfolded as the war was developing inside Gaza.
So, I mean, let's talk about that latter part, because obviously that's a part that the media have focused heavily on, is the cost of the war in Gaza itself. Hamas launched this war, presumably without thinking about the civilians, or actively knowing, actually, that many, many civilians were going to be killed. Their entire tunnel apparatus was built under civilian areas with the explicit goal of forcing the Israelis to kill civilians in order to get to them, in order to generate presumably Western support for some sort of ceasefire, which is actually what many people in the West have been seeking. When you spoke to Hamas officials, when you spoke to terrorist leaders, what was their perspective on what they were trying to accomplish on October 7th and what their long-term goal was?
Well, I'll tell you, in many of the questions and conversations that I posed to this Hamas leadership, some of whom I've actually met in person inside Gaza before October 7th during the course of my reporting there, they lied very frequently. And whenever I would pose questions about what happened in the kibbutzim, in these communities along the border, my team and I went into Kfar Aza, we went into Be'eri, we went to the Nova Festival site, in many cases before they were cleared from Hamas gunmen. And we saw the bodies that were spread throughout these communities, the massacre that took place against a civilian population. And when I posed these questions about why this took place and why these people who actually in Israeli society are considered on the left wing, many of them peace activists who try and help Gazan civilians, were slaughtered, they lied. And they said only soldiers were targeted, only military bases were targeted along the border. And I told them that simply is not true. And as the war developed, some of the sources that I had for years would send me messages, and they would send video clips of my reporting when I embedded with the Israeli military inside Gaza, saying that it was fake and it was made up, even though it was real reporting happening in real time. And I was giving them an opportunity as a journalist on the ground in the Middle East to comment on the reporting, comment on the tunnel that I entered underneath Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. And they simply didn't want to in many cases. And when they did want to comment, they were trying to spin me. And so I thought it was important in Black Saturday, in this new upcoming book, to talk with Israeli leadership and Hamas leadership, because I think it gives the reader a real perspective about what these officials believe about October 7th, but also about the war that is still unfolding inside Gaza as we speak.
Now, Trey, what you're saying here is so amazingly important, and it does raise the question of why so many members of the media, people who have not been on the ground, seem to very often just buy the Hamas line, because Hamas does lie on a routine basis. Every war is dirty. Every war is going to have enormous casualties. Israel has really attempted to ship in enormous amounts of food supplies, for example, to the civilian population. They've obviously had to move enormous numbers of civilians from area to area across the Gaza Strip. And that, of course, is going to take a major humanitarian toll. And yet the story in the West seems to have been, for most of the media, that Israel was pursuing some sort of deeply non-humanitarian mission in the Gaza Strip with indiscriminate fire being a regular feature of how the Israelis are going about their business, which is, number one, ignorant of how an urban war is fought, but number two, it's ignorant of how the political system in Israel even works. I mean, the reality is that before October 7th, Israel has been a very deeply divided political society in which many of the different parties are working really at odds with one another. And yet when it came to the military operations in the Gaza Strip, that's being run by the IDF. I mean, that's being run by probably the most bipartisan institution that exists in the state of Israel.
The Israeli society is absolutely divided, and even more so today as the war continues, and there are still more than 100 hostages, some of them dead, some of them alive, being held by Hamas inside Gaza. And this has put pressure on the Israeli government and military and raised questions about how the war is being conducted, how the negotiations are being conducted. And that's part of our role covering all of this. But I can tell you, I entered Gaza 5 separate times on military embeds, and it is a challenging environment to operate in as a journalist. But also, I feel it's my role as a journalist to talk to everyone involved. And so if you go back and you watch our pieces from Shifa Hospital, for example, a place that I once entered at night with the Israeli military as they raided the facility, and then a week later during the daytime, and I write about this in Black Saturday, sort of the disconnect between day and night inside Gaza. But during the daytime embed, I spoke with Israeli officials on the ground, people like Daniel Hagari, the top spokesman for the Israeli military, and also with Palestinian civilians who were taking a UN bus that had been coordinated with the Israeli military to the south of Gaza where they were evacuating to. And I always tell people it's critical to put everything in this story into context, because as journalists, no one is asking us to not report on what's happening inside Gaza, but we also have to talk about October 7th. We have to talk about Black Saturday and how all of this began. And so part of my role on the ground here is to speak with everyone involved. It's to talk with the Israelis. It's to talk with the civilians who survived the massacre, to get their stories, to make sure that people don't forget about the first day of this war, this massacre that took place unexpectedly on a holiday as people were at home on Shabbat. But also to speak with Palestinian civilians about what the war has been like for them, what they hope for the future of Gaza, if they want Hamas in control of Gaza after what happened and this that took place. And I explained to people that the answers that I get in gathering all of this information, they often exist on a spectrum. Sometimes, and this was true even before the war, before October 7th, you'd find people in Gaza from like the Al-Qassam brigades, for example, and their whole life's mission is to slaughter Israelis and Jews and to take over the state of Israel. You'd also meet Palestinian civilians that were frustrated with Hamas leadership, that wanted to run their businesses in Gaza City. They wanted to run an ice cream shop or sell paper at a store in the heart of Gaza. And so I try to gather all of these stories, get the information to our viewers, and then let them decide based on the facts that they see and the information that they receive from the ground, from our reporting on the front lines.
So when you're talking with Gazan civilians, this has become a major issue because when you're talking about the future of what's going to happen next in Gaza, this obviously has major ramifications. When you're talking with Gazan civilians, well, you spoke obviously with many of them before October 7th. You've spoken with many since October 7th. So what is the perception of Hamas? What is the perception of what they wish would happen next? What was their perception of October 7th, both in the immediate aftermath and then as the war progressed, when obviously things got a lot worse for Gazan civilians on the ground?
It's a really interesting question. And I found in the course of my reporting for this new book, Black Saturday, that some civilians, even ones who live in the United States, there's a woman that I interview, and I was in touch with her as the war was developing in Gaza. Someone connected me with her, and I was trying to get a better idea of what was happening on the ground there. And she actually lives in Utah. And I found her views to be very extreme from the point of Palestinian civilians even, and she lives in the United States. And she talked about the resistance fighters in Hamas. And she talked about October 7th in almost a positive light. And then I also spoke with Palestinian civilians like a doctor named Raed Mossa, who worked for UNRWA, but he was educated in Israel. And he had friends in Tel Aviv, Israeli doctors that he studied with. And these were two examples of two people who spoke English, who were able to speak to me about the situation inside Gaza, both civilians, not fighting on behalf of Hamas, but that had drastically different views. And interestingly, one lived in the United States. And actually, both of them now are living in the United States because this doctor was able to go to America on an O-1 visa. But his reaction when I asked him about October 7th and what he did was reaching out to his friends in Tel Aviv to make sure they were okay. Now, there were other people that I asked, and they really didn't care. They could care less about the situation. So in terms of the future, though, of Gaza and who will be in control and what the people of Gaza want, I think the focus now is on survival for many Gazans. Living through a war for a year is challenging for civilians. Many have been displaced inside Gaza and are living in tents. And so a lot of people are curious about what comes next, what the leadership will look like. We just did a story recently along the border at the Kerem Shalom crossing, and I felt this was actually the best opportunity I've had throughout the war to speak with Palestinian civilians about their experience. The Israelis and the Emiratis worked to evacuate injured Palestinian children from Gaza. And I spoke with these Palestinians on the border as they were evacuating, as part of an evacuation that was coordinated by the Israelis. And even these people had a variety of different views. Some people I spoke to were just so thankful to get out of Gaza and get the much needed medical treatment that they needed. Others were quite frustrated, and they said, look, the injuries that I have were caused by the Israeli air campaign against Gaza. And so I think the future of Gaza, it's an open-ended question. But I always, as in the course of the reporting, you'll notice from the book, have insisted that two things can be true at once. That October 7th was the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. And we shouldn't stop talking about that. And we shouldn't stop talking about the hostages that are still being held inside Gaza. Also, the Israeli campaign against Hamas in Gaza led to the highest death toll among Palestinians in the history of their people. And we can talk about those two things at the same time. And we can talk about the protection of civilians amid war, but we can't forget about how this all started. And that's been sort of the course of my reporting as we speak with Palestinians, as we speak with Israelis and officials here on the ground.
Well, the book, again, is Black Saturday, an unfiltered account of the October 7th attack on Israel and the war in Gaza by Trey Yingst. Trey, really appreciate what you're doing, and thanks for your reporting.
Thank you, Ben.
All righty, guys, coming up, more updates on Diddy. Plus, Joe Biden goes to the UN. So we have an incoherent president speaking to a useless organization. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.
The stage is set. The stakes are sky high. Senator Vance, Governor Walz, face off. But who will land the knockout punch? Don't watch the debate alone. Experience it with the most trusted names in conservative media. Daily Wire Backstage brings you unfiltered commentary, biting wit, and expert analysis you won't get anywhere else. Join Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, and Jeremy Boring for a debate night you'll never forget. Daily Wire Backstage, Tuesday, October 1st, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, only on Daily Wire Plus.